In this video, we're going to talk about proportions, and proportions are a way to relate ratios. And so if you don't know what ratios are, you need to watch that video. But in proportions, you have two ratios that are equal. So by definition, a proportion must have two ratios that are equal. And if you remember, ratios can be written as a fraction. And so up on the board here is an example problem that you might have. Which of the following forms a proportion? And they'll give you three multiple choice answers, and you'll see that you have essentially two fractions with an equal sign. And so if they form a proportion, then that means that this is true, that these two ratios, in this case written as fractions, are equal. So if they're not equal, then it's not a proportion. In a proportion, the two ratios must be equal. So how we go about this problem is just go through each one and see if they are equal. So we'll first look at choice A. 3/5 equals 15/26. So how are we going to tell if those two are equal? You might want to watch the comparing fractions video on how we can do this. But one way is, remember, fractions are just a division. So if you are able to use your calculator in this part of the test, you can just do 3 divided by 5, you'd get a number, and then do 15 divided by 26. If those two numbers are the same, then these two things are equal. The other way you can do it is by cross multiplying, and so that's how we're going to do it here. So if you remember how to cross multiply, you just take the numerator here, the denominator in this fraction, the numerator in this fraction, the denominator in that fraction, you multiply. So we do 3 times 26, and then we do 15 times 5. 3 times 26 is 78. 15 times 5 is 75. Since 78 and 75 are not equal, this is not equal. These two fractions are not equal. So that is not the right answer, because in order to form a proportion, they have to be equal. And since they're not, this is not the right answer. So again, watch the comparing fractions video if that doesn't make sense to you. So let's go down to B. We know A is not the right answer. Is B the right answer? Again, we're going to do it by cross multiplication. 17 times 60 and 51 times 20. Well, 17 times 60 is 1020. 51 times 20 is 1020. So these two numbers are the same. We've got 1020 and 1020. Therefore, these two fractions are the same, and therefore they are equal, and therefore they form a proportion. So this is the right answer. So since we have the right answer, and there's only one answer that we can choose, we don't even need to do that problem. So again, in a proportion, you have two ratios, and they have to be equal in order to form a proportion. So when they're written in fractional form, you just check to see if those two fractions are equal. I'm going to pause and write another problem up on the board. So here's another type of problem that you will see related to proportions, and they have to do with the rate of work usually. So here's a problem. Ken works 4 hours to make 20 widgets. At the same rate, how many widgets will he make in 7 hours? So the key to this problem, when you see these words, at the same rate, that should key you in that you most likely have a proportion problem. And so what that means is he's going to continue to work at the same rate. He's not going to all of a sudden start making widgets faster or start making them slower. He's going to make them at the same rate. So it's saying he's working 4 hours and he's making 20 widgets. So how many widgets can he make in 7 hours? So the way you're going to set this problem up is in fractional form. You're going to look at the first sentence here. Ken works 4 hours to make 20 widgets. So you're just going to set it up as a fraction. Remember, this is a ratio, but we're going to write it in fractional form. It doesn't matter which one you put on top or which one you put on the bottom. but you have to be consistent throughout the problem. So here we put the 4 on top. The 4 was the number of hours, and we put the 20 on the bottom, and the 20 was the number of widgets. So remember, in a proportion, this has to be equal to another ratio. What is that other ratio? Well, how many widgets will he make in 7 hours? So we're going to set up our ratio or our fraction. And now in this part of the question, we have 7 hours. Remember, we put hours in the numerator. So on this side, we have to put hours, 7 hours, in the numerator. And we're trying to figure out how many widgets. And so, because we don't know, we're going to make that x. And we're going to solve for x. That's the answer to this problem. So I'm just showing you how to set the problem up, where you look at the first part of the problem, 4 hours, 20 widgets. At the same rate, how many widgets will he make in 7 hours? We don't know how many widgets, so we put that on the bottom, 7 hours on top. And now we're going to do essentially the same thing we did in the last problem, is what makes these two ratios or fractions equal? And we're going to have to solve for x to find that out. So we're going to cross multiply. 4 times x. 4 times x you can write as 4x. 4 times x, and it has to equal 7 times 20. So remember when we did cross multiplication, and then we said, are those two things equal? If they were equal, then it's a proportion. So here we're saying that they have to be equal in order to be a proportion. So 4 times x has to equal 7 times 20. So 4 times x, or 4x, is how you can write that. 7 times 20 is 140. So 4 times the number of widgets equals 140. So now we just need to solve for x. And the way that we do that is we divide each side by this number. So this number now is 4. So we're going to divide each side by 4. And remember that a fraction is really a division, so I can write it like this. So I have 4x divided by 4 equals 140 divided by 4. 4x divided by 4, these two things cancel out. So we have x equals 140 divided by 4. And that is going to be 35. So the number of widgets, or x, is 35. And so you should always try and go back and say, does this make sense? If it's 4 hours to make 20 widgets, how many widgets can you make in 7 hours? Well, if you would double that, it'd be 8 hours, and so you should be able to make 40 widgets in 8 hours, but we're not quite doubled at 7 hours, so it should be a little less than 40, and so 35. So our answer actually makes sense. But the way we set it up is as a proportion. 4 over 20 equals 7 over x, and we solve for x by doing the cross multiplication. We'll do one more problem. Here's a similar problem. Jane makes 23 cogs in 4 hours. At the same rate, how many hours does it take to make 42 cogs? Again, when you see these words, that should key you in to having a proportion problem and to doing the types of steps that we're doing in this video. So we're going to use a proportion. We're going to set it up as two fractions and make them equal, because again, a proportion, you have to have equal ratios. Jane makes 23 cogs in 4 hours. So again, it doesn't matter which one you put on top or which one you put on the bottom, but you have to be consistent when you go into your second ratio. So that's going to equal how many hours does it take, so we again don't know how many hours it takes to make 42 cogs. So again, as I said, it doesn't matter which one you put on top and which one you put on bottom. If we said 4 over 23, then when we do this, we have to write it x over 42. It doesn't matter if we set the problem up like this or we set the problem up like this, we're going to get the same answer. The key is, because on this, when we set it up this way, cogs was on top, we have to have 42 on top. We can't write it like this. If we do that, we're going to get the wrong answer, because here we have cogs on top, here we have hours, because we're trying to figure out what x is, and we have hours on the bottom here, but we have cogs on the bottom here. If we set it up like this, we're not going to get the right answer. You have to set it up, here we have cogs on the top, so we have to have cogs on the top when we say these things are equal. So again, it doesn't matter if we set it up 23 over 4 or 4 over 23, as long as the second fraction is set up appropriately. So we're just going to do it this way. We're going to cross multiply to solve this problem. 23 times x we can write as 23x equals 42 times 4. 42 times 4. 23x equals 42 times 4 is 168. So now we have to solve for x, because remember, how many hours? That's what x represents. So how do we solve for x in this problem? We simply divide each side by the number, by 23. So we're going to divide by 23 on both sides. That cancels out, so we have x equals 168 divided by 23. If you put that in your calculator, you're going to get 7.3. So, how many hours does it take to make 42 cogs? 7.3 hours. Does that make sense? Well, if we went for 8 hours, we would have double the number of cogs. So that would be 2 times 23 is 46. Well, we're not quite making 46, we're making 42, so it should be less than 8. So 7.3. So our answer does make sense. But again, proportions, make sure you set the problem up correctly, do cross multiplication, solve for x, and you'll get your answer.